Well, grab your gear today. Welcome back as we head out into the sea to see what we can learn about the world of Pacific yachting. A couple of guys that know very well this world that I know very little about here. Let's start with our host, Joe Bergman.
Hello, everybody, again. And today, my guest is Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill is certainly well known in the Newport on the West Coast, or both coasts, I'm sure. It's not like he hasn't been at it for a few years and everything, and everybody knows him, whether they have a boat or not.
Well, that's what I hear.
Okay. Well, okay, let's start about, I had a simple little question we were talking about before we began, and that was about a ship's log. And Paul here wanted to know what a ship's log is.
I see old movies about sailing ships or something, and the captain's writing down his notes daily or something here. Is that what it is? Just their voyage, or is it the conditions of the sea?
Basically, that's what it is, but there's an awful lot of stuff in that log.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, logs can be kept relatively simple or become very complex, and typically it is something that is filled out at the start of a voyage with your current location, where you're departing from, where your intended destination is, who's on board. And so on our own personal boat, we would write our location, where we're leaving. I would make a log entry as we cleared the jetty. I would make a log entry generally every hour as to the weather, sea conditions, anything that may come up. I would do an engine check every hour. So because I don't keep a specific engine room log, I would note anything that came up.
Somebody's phone is ringing there. Joe's looking around here. I think it's Bunker Hill's getting a request immediately here for...
It might have been.
So I only got two more questions. I'll try and be quiet here, but this is fascinating me because why? I guess you're going to laugh at me. Why keep a log at all? Is it just for maintenance purposes, or why do I need to say every hour I cleared the jetty or something here? Why would I do that?
Well, it's a historical data of what's going on your voyage, and that you might need to know at some point in time that at a certain period of engine hours running for an hour and a half or whatever, that your engine starts to have problems, or you have other things that come along. It's something that what the origin of it is, I can't really speak to, but that was something I was trained to do when I was young. When you really went to sea, we didn't do it on every time we left the harbor to go water skiing or anything like that, but certainly is something that's been done for a long period of time. And as I said, some get more complex. You're recording engine data, your location. Now with GPS, we just write down our GPS coordinates where we are when we do that. And
Joe had a great question. Do you literally do it by hand in a book?
Yes, it's book written. And I happen to own a vessel that is a little over 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I have log books that go back to its first days on the water, back into 1925.
That's a hell of an accomplishment right there, because that's a good thing about in buying a boat or dealing with another boat or being on a boat or something like that. That's going to tell you a lot that you might want to know at some point in your voyage. And nowadays, I think people find that, the owners should find it very useful. When you are keeping track of things that on your voyage and everything, whatever you're doing and things that you note and make note of on the log, then when you come back in, you talk to a maintenance place or something like that and say, hey, what would this be the cause of, or whatever? And then they say, well, bring your 80-foot boat over and we'll take a quick look at it and things like that. But no, it's very useful to have.
But am I the only one amazed that you're still doing this by hand on a paper book?
Well, keeping in mind, in a lot of cases, it's easier and quicker to do it than if you're on a sailboat, than to have some computer that's there that doesn't have the proper power. The boat may not have that. But
I picture everything's on a phone app these days or something.
Yeah, you don't always have phone connection unless you have more modern electronics or Starlink or something that will allow you to do that. So, yeah, it's generally done in paper form, and then the books are kept with the boat and often passed along to the following owners, as in the case of my vessel.
Beyond that, just a little bit here. How often do you deal with naval architects? Just out of your own curiosity, or in, say, an individual situation?
Naval architects are also naval engineers,
Right.
because a lot of naval architects don't really do the engineering. We deal with them probably a half a dozen times a year with various questions, and sometimes it's not real in-depth. It's just, I just got an email from overseas on the roof structure of a vessel today that I was reading through, so there's would be one case in point.
And somebody wanted to tweet, I don't think we correctly identified what it is that you do.
Okay, so I'm a marine surveyor, and what we do is we do vessel inspections primarily in our firm for pre-purchase evaluation. We do insurance renewal work. The underwriters who carry most of the liability for the vessel want to make sure that the owner's taking good care of their vessel. And then we will get involved in some insurance claims from time to time. We will do some consulting. I have worked with clients that are building boats, and we will work in hand with the boat builder or help the owner understand that he may want things differently than they are offering to do them.
Now, what range of boats would you bother or make the effort to survey, like a small electric boat, or how large would you go?
Well, on the lower end of the scale, our target market isn't a Duffy electric boat or a 13-foot whaler. However, I often share the story of a gentleman called me one day, and I had surveyed multiple boats for him, multiple boats for his son, and his grandson was buying a 13-foot whaler, and he said, "Bunker, I'm sorry to ask." And I said, "Where is it? When can I look at it?" So in order to keep that client happy and in the fold, would I go do that? Yes. Do I want to? That's not a target market. As far as how big, here in California, we tend to see things up to about 130 feet. Beyond that, there's just not a lot of product around that's that size. And there are 2 or 3 well-respected firms on the East Coast that I would say tend to start in the 85 to 90 feet and up range.
Wow.
And most boats that are, say, 150 feet to 300 feet trade hands either in South Florida or in Europe.
There's a vessel that comes into Newport occasionally, and he's 290 feet long. Would you ever deal with a boat like that?
Sure.
Yeah. That's quite a deal you have. How much greater or thorough, well, greater would be better, I think, would it be for you to go through a 60-foot or a 150-foot? There's not a lot of difference. There's a hull and the engines and the navigation gear and all that kind of stuff. But what big difference, or what difference might there be in between those sizes?
Well, it's an interesting question, because if you look at it if you take a 60-foot boat and you double it in size and say 120-foot boat, you're really getting 3 to 4 times the amount of vessel, because you're going to have a larger beam, you're going to have multiple decks, and so it's not just twice as big, it's often 3 or 4 times larger in overall equipment and volume and spaces and bilges and so on and so forth. However, when you get to those larger sizes, in most and almost all cases, there is professional crew looking after them. And we tend to find the better ones in way better shape. A 60-foot boat is often owner-maintained, or he manages the maintenance, and they can get pretty ratty and long in the tooth if there's just not the funds. And boating's a funny thing. People want a big boat, but they want to pay for a small one. And so there's a lot of ways to... there's no free lunch, but what they do is they think they're winning the battle of saving money while they're maintaining their boat, and things are going backwards, often rapidly.
I don't know if Orange Coast does it or not, but is there any type of education for boat owners, first-time boat owners or whatever? They have a lot of courses, I know, but something like what you're just talking about, how they need to pay attention to everything.
Yeah, taking some of the classes, and I'm not familiar with their exact curriculum there, although I've spent some time speaking to the younger people that want to come into the trades. I often go in and we do faux interviews and that kind of thing for some of the instructors there. it's not a bad thing for them to take some of the classes. And again, it comes down to personality. We have a lot of people that just have to have a captain's license. They just want to do that. They want to know more. They realize they have people's lives in their hands, and unfortunately it seems that's becoming more rare, and we have more people that if I have enough money I can just buy one and get a California boater's card, and off I can go to the races.
Yeah.
Now,
which isn't much of a card.
The insurance companies are becoming the regulator there in their own indirect way, because they will not allow just anybody to operate a boat that they're insuring. You can't necessarily not own a boat, go out and buy an 80-footer, and your insurance company's going to say, great, we're happy to insure you to operate it.
They will?
No, they will not.
Oh,
They'll say you need a captain, or you need this. And that's in marine insurance, and their vision of keeping the asset safe or protected is becoming, they've got a much closer eye on that today than they have in the past.
And they're protecting.
And somebody wants to know, do you need a captain's license for everything? If I go out in a 30-foot boat or a 300-foot boat, is there a difference?
Yes, there is. Typically you don't really find in a 30-foot boat range, you're not required to have a captain's license necessarily unless you're operating a vessel professionally. Now, if you have one as a private operator, it may help you be able to operate a larger vessel without having crew.
There's a range of licenses too, like 6-pack up and everything.
Yeah, and they get into tonnage, and you have a 100-ton, 200-ton, 500-ton, and all the way to an unlimited any tonnage, any ocean type of license.
Now, you mentioned something a moment ago, trades. How often do you talk to classes or groups or whatever as far as getting into the trades, or should you get into the trades, and what do you talk to them about?
I talk to them once or twice a year, depending on how often it's requested by one of the instructors at Orange Coast College. I talk to individuals that call me, or I run across quite regularly, and really what I talk to them about is to be successful, you have to keep your client first. And what I mean by that is that owning a boat is not for the weak of heart. It's financially expensive. There's a lot of people there's some very skilled tradesmen in our industry that are terrible businessmen.
Yeah.
And they don't show up
when they say they're going to. That's unfortunate too.
Yeah, they don't show up when they say they're going to. They don't have the courtesy to make the call. And it can be very aggravating to boat owners, and boat owners don't understand. Yeah. There's a wide gap between the ability to go out and buy a Subaru, for example, and run it for 100,000 miles with a few oil changes and go get yourself another one and have no problems. They're far from that. And
you got to get back to shore.
Well, you have to get back to shore, and I often say that whoever thought taking a vessel and storing it in salt water must have been crazy, and yet most of us do it. Now, not all bodies of water are salt water, but what we deal with primarily is.
But a great amount of, or number of boats is saltwater.
Correct. Yeah. Virtually
Huge
everything we deal with is saltwater oriented. Yeah.
Now, in getting into the trades, how does one educate themselves to become into the trades?
Well, typically they go to work for someone that's in a trade that they're interested in, whether it be a diesel mechanic or whether it's a marine electrician, if it's a shipwright, and that name has taken on different definition in today's world, where we're moving away. Obviously, we've moved way away from wooden boats for the most part to fiberglass and now into composites. And
what does I don't know what a shipwright does. I've heard the term. That's the guy that actually repairs the boat or something, or builds.
Yeah, a shipwright would be someone in the olden days, if you will, that would be qualified to build a wooden vessel or do extensive repairs, replace planks, build frames, steam bend a curved frame, those kinds of things. Now, there's that obviously being something of the past, although there's still some of us fools that own wood boats.
I take it you own a wood boat.
I do, yeah. But now we're building things out of not just fiberglass, but composite materials such as Kevlar and carbon fiber, and understanding how that a lot of that has a core material in it, and what core to use, where to use it, how to keep it light, how to infuse instead of just hand laminating it like an old surfboard, they infuse it, which is basically a vacuum resin system that keeps the resin and the fiberglass content to a more precise measurement than we were ever able to do with hand laminate.
Now, as a surveyor, when you are down on the docks alongside a boat, and where do you begin as far as your survey goes?
Well, it would be wonderful if we could start in the front end of the boat and work front to back. Oftentimes when we do this, we're working hand in hand with a mechanic, and so some of the tasks of the day is we're going to need to take the boat to the boatyard and haul it out. We're also going to need to take the boat for a trial run and go run around in the ocean and check a variety of things while we're doing that. So we try to get into the engine room first and get out of the engine room before the mechanic needs to be there or is there. Boats over 50 feet, there's oftentimes for a couple of us to crawl around in an engine room. Below that, it's really a one body cavity, if you will. And so we generally start in the engine room, and then we'll move inside. And it can have a lot to do with the weather, what's going on today. Are we having rain this morning? Then we'll go inside. If we think it's going to rain in the afternoon, we want to do the outside of the boat before the weather comes in. And that could be geographical. If I'm working in South Florida or Central America, where we know we have afternoon squalls and things like that, I don't want to put that off until then.
What does one need to take care of, well, not take care of necessarily, but pay attention to over the boat from the outside? Anything from the cleats to all the line and things of that nature?
Yeah, there's on the outside of the boat, and there's anything from the basic deck hardware,
right,
the deck hatches, any opening ports that you would look at from the outside. If it's a sailboat, you've got all the standing rigging coming off of the mast and the running rigging and the winches and the turning blocks and that kind of equipment. And then there are certain bilge spaces that are only accessible from on deck. So if you've got inclement weather and you've got to climb into a space and it's raining on top of you, you don't want to be doing that. On a power boat, you've got anchor windlass, typically bow rails. You've got, obviously, the navigation lights are outside on both power and sail. Up on the flybridge or in a pilot house, you're looking at we're operating all of the electronics. And the other thing that we will do on most of those boats is we'll take some sort of, I use a plastic body hammer mallet, and we sound the decks and cabin sides and coach house roofs and things like that to try to identify if the vessel has the decks have any delamination or core saturation, any anomalies that may come up from sounding the decks. And so that would be things that we would look for, which could become are somewhat structurally deficient.
This is a plastic hammer you use?
Yes.
Not that I would know, but I haven't really paid much attention to the tools as often as I have in the past. But there are things that the boat owner could, not as a surveyor, but for their own curiosity, do things like that. Now, what other things beyond testing the hull and things like that you mentioned should they pay close attention to, and how can they pay better attention to?
Are you meaning if they're preparing for a survey? Or?
No, just in general.
Well, yeah. Cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to boats, for sure. And most people don't see that things in their own boat. So clean bilges, but particularly under engine spaces. So if you go in and you look, I jump in an engine room and the oil drip pan area is full of fluids, I know the owner doesn't know where that's coming from and how long it's probably been there. If it's clean and tidy and there's an oil absorption pad in there and you've got some drops of something, that's what owners should be looking for, so they can identify there's a problem before it grows into something that is larger than they want to pay for to correct.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because people need to look pay more attention or look more often down below and everything, and to other things besides the oil dripping or things like that, the condition of the shaft, or I can't think of anything that people would be able to really identify as a problem when they're looking at it. But down below, underneath, where the engine is and other equipment is too, beyond what you just mentioned, what things should they pay attention to and how should they pay attention to it?
Well, boats have a variety of systems in them,
Sure.
and all of them need attention. So you've got, and I say to people, you need to understand the noises your boat's going to make. If you should know what the water pump sounds like when it cycles on. So if you're on anchor, you're sitting in Catalina, and you turn the water faucet on at the sink and you hear something rumble, that's probably your water pump. So in the middle of the night, if that starts to rumble, you go, oh, that's the water pump, or that's the refrigerator kicking on. The air horn is losing air and rebuilding pressure. Understanding that will let you help you to learn to understand what's going on. And then having a good ear for just the engines themselves. Am I looking backwards as we're going forward and seeing more smoke than normal? Is the engine sound like it's not running correctly? Not a lot different than you might find with your own car. You get in it and something sounds funny to you, or there's a rattle or something wasn't there before. Those are things that a boat owner should be in tune to. How's the steering feel? Does it feel like it's normal? Are you getting the response from the helm that you should be getting? And if not, then most steering systems these days are hydraulic. So have I put fluid in it? Have I checked the fluid? There's just, the list goes on and on.
How sophisticated, though, are most boat owners? I'm assuming the boats you deal with, there's like 80 foot, 100 foot, whatever, big boats, big cost to run these things, but I picture just people buy them and don't really know what they're getting into or know what they're doing. They wouldn't know what the engine should sound like.
Well, that's correct, and unfortunately it's becoming more and more common that, and particularly in our local area where there's enough wealth that you can afford to have an item like this and afford not want to be bothered with checking it out. And they don't check out anything. They take their Mercedes to the local dealer. They don't worry about why their grass is green because their landscaper's taking care of that. But when you leave the dock on a vessel, and if you're operating it, and I'm just speaking of the standard pleasure craft where the owner would be the operator, you have the life of everybody on board in your hands. And so you should know enough about that system to be able to keep those people safe under normal conditions.
Now, you were mentioning the various materials in the manufacture of the boat, the hull, and things like, where does a boat leak? There are obvious places, but not everybody knows what obvious is and where obvious is. And then we go from the fiberglass and plastics and metals, how many metals are being used in manufacturing of the larger boats now? Mainly just a couple of them, right?
Well, if you're looking at many mega yachts, if you will, and this is stuff we don't do a ton of work on, the hulls are typically steel and the cabins are aluminum. And that's pretty standard. There are some mega yachts. The big one that come into Newport is they're fiberglass because they were built locally here in the United States by a builder in Seattle. That's how they build their boats. Europeans build most of the mega yachts in metal. But in your average standard vessel that's down here, 60-foot fiberglass powerboat, you're going to have primarily stainless steel deck hardware and screws or fasteners, as we call them. There's going to be, throughout the engine room, the engines are obviously mostly steel or iron. Lots of stainless steel is used. Your through-hole fittings are more often bronze than any other metal, and it's not pure bronze. None of these metals are pure. They're an alloy. Silicon bronze is typically the more preferred bronze that's used in marine applications. The shafts on most boats are going to be a stainless steel alloy. The common term would be Aquamet 22 is what we would see in most. Aquamet is a brand, but they make a 19 and a 17, and being an alloy, that's just a description of what parts of that are, how much iron's in it basically, and other metals. In the propellers are often what they call nibral. We say they're bronze, but the nibral is nickel, bronze, and aluminum in an alloy that makes up the structure of the propellers, and two different manufacturers may not. Their recipe for nibral may be different than each other, a little bit more of one metal than another. The rudders are typically, sailboats are often composite or fiberglass. Power boats are often stainless steel or cast bronze.
Okay. Now, along that very line, the shafts, the props, the rudders, what things can a boat owner notice in the operation of their vessel in those three areas especially?
Yeah, in the shafts, the one thing they want to pay attention to is where the shaft enters into the boat. Mm-hmm. There's some sort of a seal. We used to call them a packing gland because back in the 60s, that's what they were. Those packing glands are still in use today, but there's also dripless applications you can use. There's 2 or 3 different primary manufacturers of that. Keeping an eye on those, making sure they're not leaking, making sure there's not any excessive vibration at those areas. Rudders, the same way. The rudder's got to come up through the boat, typically below waterline, and so you want to keep an eye on that to make sure it's not leaking and that it doesn't need to be serviced or resealed. And then keeping an eye on any of the through-hole fittings around the boat, seeing that they're exercised regularly so the valve will shut in the case of emergency, but there's no breach of sealant or caulking that you have water leaking in, or fittings that have gone bad, thread leaking, a hose. So those are in the bilges. That's where the majority of the water will come from. There's other sources that can supply that. Poor deck hatches or seals in older boats. When you bring an anchor up, a lot of that anchor, the water that comes off of the anchor chain or the anchor line just goes into the bilge and is left for the bilge to pump it out.
We're coming down to the last couple of minutes. I just got to ask one question as I sit and listen to you rattle off all these technical details about all the construction, all the things in the boat. How did you learn all this stuff? How did you get into this, and how did you learn everything from boat design and bilge pumps to navigation systems and what the boat should sound like? That seems like an amazing amount of knowledge that you've had to pick up.
Well, I was very fortunate and have lived this idyllic life. I was born and raised here in Newport Beach. My father owned a fuel dock here on the harbor, and we had a house on the water back when you didn't have to be a Rockefeller to do that. and we always had some boat with some kind of power, a little outboard or what have you. And my dad told us that when you can jump off the front of the house and swim across to the island over the other side of the channel, you can use our boat. And so there was a lot of it that I learned through desire to be on there. And then I loved old boaters. And my dad had a lot of them that hung around the fuel dock, and they would teach me. And he had old boats. From time to time, we would go through them, and we would restore them and refinish them and varnish them and do all kinds of things. And I just picked up. I was just like a magnet to it. And I've always had this kind of spongy mind. I couldn't take a test in school to save my life, but I could go down and repack a shaft log at 12 years old. And
so this is what you learned by trade and experience. You're not a naval engineer or an architect or mechanical engineer or something.
No, I wished I was better at school and could pay more attention, because I think of myself as having an engineering type of desire in thinking, but I never had the capacity to sit and learn and in a normal schooling atmosphere.
The fuel dock is still a hill business in Newport Beach, right?
It is, yeah. It's my nephew Carson is now owns and operates that, and he's the third generation and doing a great job, I might add.
Good.
And it's a great place. So we having that idyllic life. I call it like the old TV show Flipper. We just didn't have the dolphin.
You lived Flipper. I remember Flipper. I'm dating myself here.
Well, I'm really pleased to have you here. Greatly pleased, I'm sure. And I hope that we get a lot of questions from people out there. And what do people need to pay the most attention to on their boat quickly?
I think safety gear.
Yeah.
It's understanding where things are, where your life jackets are, where your emergency gear is, where your fire extinguishers are. The things that boating is, it's a party world. We get on board, nobody gets on board without a six-pack of beer kind of thing. And so things can go awry very quickly.
And operating the radio. Most people don't even know how to operate their radios on the boat.
Right, knowing which channels to be on. We could do a whole segment on that kind of stuff.
Well, again, thank you very much for being here.
And
Great to be here.
How do they reach you if somebody wants to learn more or have you come out and look at their boat or is thinking of buying a boat? How do they reach you?
Really,
Joe says everybody knows you, but we don't. So
the best way to reach me and or my son is through our office at 949-646-3038 or on my cell phone 949-422-9563. I'd give you my son's cell phone number, but I don't have it memorized.
So no website or anything? Just call me and I'll pick up the phone. And
No, we do have a website. You can look up Bunker A Hill Marine Surveyors.com, I think it is, and it'll pop up. We've never had the drive behind the website that it's never been as fruitful for us as it might be for many other
Everybody
businesses.
knows you. They've seen you there. And they just call you up. Everybody's got your number on speed dial. Amazing. Thank you for joining us here today. I hope you'll come back and give us more of your insight and knowledge, because you seem to have an amazing array of details about an amazingly complex product that I think too many people just say, Rich, now I'm going to go buy a boat.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'd love to come back anytime.
Yeah, we're going to have you back many times, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no,
Great.
This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining us here.
You bet.
Well, there you go. We're just opening the hatch and looking a little bit under what's the waterline there as we take a look at the world of yachting, Pacific yachting especially, right here in Orange County's only community radio station. Streaming live from our studios here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.